This show is sponsored by levities.co, Raw, Edgy, and Humorless apparel. Remember, you don't have to agree with them. You have that right. Welcome to Mind Matters, and thank you for joining Dan Ploger and myself, John Krotek. This podcast is where we discuss the critical social, economic, and spiritual issues that affect all of us. We, the people, are in a battle against the forces of entropy, forces that are hell-bent on gaining power for personal reasons, forces hell-bent on destroying the concepts of freedom and individual thought, forces which don't benefit the social order. Thank you again. Good morning, Dan. How's it going, brother?
Going good, John.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is, I guess. You know, we had a midterm election here in America yesterday, and it ended very early this morning, and just had some interesting results. You know, I'm not here to question the results, or maybe I am, but you know, it just brought to light. We just pulled this subject this morning. And I started hearing the word or the label election denier, I don't know, a year or so ago. It came out of the January 6th insurrection hearings, right? And I started to think about it because, you know, the label, it's just another label. And my gosh, we've had so many labels throughout all of history: fascist, communist, pinko, you know, radical, Republican, Democrat, you know, all these different labels that we throw on people. And I started thinking about freedom and election denial, you know, and let's get into this, man, and just let's discuss this, you know, and I'll give you my thought and let's just take it from there.
All righty.
You know, when I think about a free society and what America and its Constitution and the Bill of Rights is all about, the responsibility of the citizenry, it seems to me that that we the people actually have a right and an imperative, if you will, to question the veracity of things that we see taking place in our government and in our country. And especially if we're uncomfortable with it, you know, if things don't quite seem right, if we have a gut feeling that, wow, that doesn't appear to be correct, or, you know, we have that right, we have that imperative almost. And then we also, it's also imperative on our elected leadership. You know, we don't live in a monarchy. We don't live in a tyrannical state or a one-party rule. Maybe we do, you know, but, you know, it's imperative for that leadership in a free society, people who are elected, to be transparent and accountable. And I got to tell you, the last several years, actually the last few years, this level of intolerance and labeling has just risen to some really astronomical heights. And if you look at things like the art of war, or you study the 36 stratagems, you know, those Chinese battle techniques to win, not just on the battlefield, but in political arenas and in the boardroom, they discuss techniques like what we're seeing with this labeling and finger pointing and outright intolerance and sometimes violent discourse. Then you see these elections, some people might feel that they've been stolen or somehow hijacked. And, you know, my gosh, they're entitled to that feeling. And I think that anytime an organization or an individual or government tells you how you're supposed to feel, I think we're heading into some pretty dangerous water, deep water. What do you think about those things, Dan?
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you feel? I don't know. This seems to be the focus of the fascist attacks that we're seeing by the Democrats. They're the ones that are concerned with feelings, and I think that Western culture, ever since
Mhm.
Bacon and Descartes, have pretty much discarded that and said that your feelings are subjective, totally subjective, and we're gonna make decisions on the basis of objective truth, and that's that's what if we start addressing feelings, you end up with this craziness with the transgender that you're supposed to use the appropriate pronouns. Well, you can demand that I use certain pronouns with you, but that doesn't mean I'm going to do it. If it's against my powers of observation, I'm going to deny what you're saying. I can't deny what your feelings are. And there's nothing I can do to really affect what your feelings are. If I was a stand-up comedian, I guess I could try to make jokes that would make you smile and laugh. But that's in the realm of entertainment, not in the realm of science and modern political theory. I won't say modern political theory, political theory, put it that way. So we just can't base what we do objectively. We can't base it on subjective feelings. So all I can do is go by what I believe and see to be the truth, and make my decisions based upon that evaluation.
What you're really speaking to is the scientific method. And you're exactly right. You see something happen and then you deny that it happens, or you don't think based on your observations or on some critical thought processes that it doesn't make sense. And then, but for some reason, because you question it, all of a sudden you become this denier of the truth.
Well,
Um,
yeah,
so where does hypocrisy and double standard fit in with that? And it's
well,
amazing because we've discussed that before, and we talked about a propaganda technique that whenever you call you're an opponent or an enemy in some cases, a label, whenever you place a label on them, more often than not, history has shown that it's the same type of behavior that you're exhibiting. And for some reason, we say if we tell this lie loud enough and long enough, that even the people that tell the lie start to believe it. And then this mass collective thought process in groups, they start to believe it. So you get labeled just because you question an election. Something's up with that.
well, okay. First of all, I don't care if somebody labels me. That's their prerogative, and in a free country, that's their duty to express their feelings, I suppose. That's not of consequence, but I guess what we're worried about is, what do the stupid people think when somebody keeps calling me a fascist? Is that important? I don't know. That's a different realm, the realm of psychology, I suppose, which we certainly have to be cognizant of. But you know, yes, and there's ample evidence of projection, whereby you're doing something and you denounce it in front of the world as something that your opponents are practicing. And somehow this exonerates you from any responsibility. But there's a couple of things. One is that if something is contrary to your objective truth, to your objective observations, then what's wrong with standing up and saying, I disagree? Prove it to me. Yes, it's a scientific method. The scientific method is throw something out there, develop a hypothesis, then test the hypothesis until it's revealed to be true or false. But you do that in the public square. This is done worldwide. Papers are published worldwide so that experts on the subject can comment and critique, and also see if they can replicate your conclusions. Well, that's the scientific method. But if you see that and feel that something went wrong in an election, you see examples after examples of ballot stuffing. You see a wire running from the vote tallying machine, and you don't know where that wire goes. You're putting a lot of trust in other people, and I think to question that is not un-American in any sense. It's not even unscientific. And if you do question it, it's then for the defenders of the hypothesis, the people that say the election was fair, it's for them to prove that the election was fair. Well, there has been no accountability, and there has been no transparency to really look at these clear violations that everybody has seen, and to accept them, accept that everything was on the up and up.
Yeah, a couple of things. You raised a couple of great points there. One thing that I think about when I think of, you're right, it doesn't matter. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but words and names will never harm you. So, go ahead and label people. That's just something that the person being labeled has to deal with, and really it should not affect you personally. I heard a quote somewhere where a craving for control beats in the collective hearts of mankind or people. There's somehow this labeling and this unhealthy social discourse is a way to try to manipulate and control. But even more so, and this, Dan, healthy social discourse is in fact a prerequisite for freedom of speech. When we live in a society where people are unable to express themselves or question the things that they see and that are uncomfortable with, then we border not being in a free society. But more importantly, what you hit upon was, and I think we had talked about this one other time, the person who tallies the vote in any election is the only person who counts in an election. So let's think about that, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, and do any of us really know who's tallying the votes when we walk into that booth or wherever we go to vote our precinct? And you're right, is there a wire connected to it? Is something in the coding? If it's an electronic system, you saw the problems they had in Arizona yesterday, right? And even deeper, do you trust the counter or the counters with the future of a country that survives, a free country, if you will, that survives on the votes of the citizenry? So if you call me an election denier, call me it all you want. Call me whatever you want. Son of a gun, whatever. But you're never going to take away my freedom of speech
and your freedom of observation.
We're all, we have that right. It's a God-given right, to be able to express ourselves and to question. Could you imagine a caveman back in the day? with a saber-toothed tiger, waiting at the entrance to the cave, and the guy goes out there and, nah, it's not a saber-toothed tiger, and just goes out anyways and gets ripped to shreds, the denier. So what was he, a saber-toothed tiger denier? And where did it get him? In the jaws
Well,
of some big cat.
if somebody calls me an election denier and is not willing to prove that they're correct and that I am a denier of reality, then they have accomplished nothing. Their labeling me has nothing to do with me. It may have to do with the way other people see me, but this is out of my control. I can't do anything about the way you feel. I can only, as a trained scientist myself, all I can do is look at observations, see if they pass the smell test, and if they don't, I'd like somebody to demonstrate that their hypothesis that it was a true and fair election is positive, is true. And the only way you can do that is if you save the written ballots. What happens to the written ballots? Where do they go? Do they just sit in a storeroom somewhere, or are they immediately destroyed? Do you know? Do you know what happens to the paper ballots? Which is the only proof we have of legitimacy. I don't trust. I don't trust Twitter. I don't trust Facebook, and I don't trust any election machine that's online. I'm sorry. I don't know who is on the other end of that. And until somebody explains all of this to me and explains all the fail safes that have gone into place that prohibit some discontent to enter a line of code that affects the outcome, I'm not convinced. I don't have faith in that system. The only system I have faith in is this, the machines can count, but by God, you better save the damn ballots. So if I ask a question, was there really 2,000 votes difference between candidate A and candidate B? There's a way of demonstrating that. And you talk about transparency, that's transparency. And to call somebody an election denier while you're opaque is well inconsequential, but insincere.
Well, Dan, you hit the trifecta with your example there. You're not only an election denier, you're a technology denier, and you're a social media denier. I mean, we can label somebody for their beliefs every which way from here to eternity, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? It's okay if you're all three of those things. It doesn't matter. It's like you say, it's inconsequential. But I do know this, and there's a lot of people in different systems that believe this. You, as an individual, a nonconformist in a collective eye, you're a cancer to the system. And I'm being facetious here.
That's
And
the way many people view it. Yeah.
because you only exist to serve the state. So the labeling to me is a sleight of hand and a distraction, quite honestly, from what I believe what's really going on in the world these days. And it's not just in America. I think it's a global push for something where we become wards of the state or another number, a non-human being demonized by people who pull the strings. If that's called a conspiracy theorist, then maybe that's my label. I don't know, but it certainly looks that way. And we all you have to do is look at history. And I'm thinking about a guy by the name of Stuart Chase back in the 1930s who had an idea for what he called the third way. And the third way was a scientific economy where the investors only existed to serve the nation. And I'm thinking about this, right? In light of today. And to get there was going to take hardships, and the hardships were going to be experienced by the middle class. And let me quote Stuart Chase here. for those who are listening. He said, I'm not, this is a quote, I'm not seriously alarmed by the sufferings of the creditor class, which is the middle class, the restrictions on certain kinds of freedom, which must result in a better economic order, is worth a little bloodshed. So here's this economist and writer and a studier of 1930s Stalinist Russia, who is basically laying out groundwork for a better economic order, which he called the third way. And he even prescribed that this economic system would come by firing squad if necessary. So if the powers that be on a global level are manipulating elections in some way that are leading us to this new world order, which I didn't want to believe when I first heard about it, I don't know, 20 years ago, my kids were talking about a new world order. And I thought that it was a bunch of bunk. I'm like, you guys are listening to too much of that hardcore rock and roll, right? And what I'm seeing now is some of the things that they were telling us about may be coming to fruition. And my gosh, the art of war, the 36 stratagems that we mentioned, all of these things, Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson, and so many Communist Manifesto, and all these things that are out there that are still available for people to read and can lay the foundation of the scientific method. These things are alive and well. And this stuff's been going on since the beginning of recorded history. Man's manipulation of other men for whatever reason, gain,
Right.
control, manipulation.
But we have to remember what we're talking about: the United States of America and in American culture. And that is based around the concept of the individual as supreme, not the state, and that the state exists to serve the individual, and an individual is responsible to his God and himself. Seemed like it was a novel idea, and I guess it demonstrated to the world over the last 300 years that this really makes sense to give people, allow them to have their own initiative and allow them to serve their masters of choice rather than those that are dictated to them. And we talk about economic order. You're talking about, what does economic order mean? That means I get to control what you spend.
Exactly.
It's not something I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, and it is. It's alive and well. So are we deniers of history? Are we deniers of propaganda? Are we deniers of reality? That's what this is really about. And I say, the way around this is to, educate yourself, ask questions, don't believe everything you hear, even the results of an election.
All these arguments that we're hearing from the MSNBC, CNNs, all in the corporate media, these are all arguments that have been made time and time and time again, ever since the beginning of Marx and Stalinism and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot. These arguments have been made over and over and over again. And the question is what is the element of truth? The question is, what is the element of impact? If you stand me in front of a firing squad and say, Dan, do you believe in free enterprise? And if your answer is yes, I'll pull the trigger. That has an effect on my response. And I know that those forces that killed almost 100 million people on this earth, almost 100 million people, for the sake of communism and for the sake of some ideology. These are the biggest assaults on humanity since the world's begun. And without history, without some knowledge, without having read the arguments and counter arguments regarding these different philosophies of governance, without the knowledge of that, you have no basis other than to sit yourself in the same position that peasants in early Stalinist Russia were faced with. We've already been through this. We know that these systems fail. We know that politicians always seek more power, and it's up to us to limit the amount of power that they're able to grab a hold of. And if we see too much, we got to take it away, because fundamentally, in the United States of America, the focus is on the individual and not the state. And to take the attention away from the individual and give it to the state is anti-American. Now, I know there are huge forces in this world, much stronger than probably I can even imagine in my wildest dreams. Why am I to believe that those forces haven't taken over the levers of power in our country? I'm sorry, I'll question that, even if we have a populist president like Donald Trump, and who claims that everything he does is for the good of the individual. I still have a right to question that. And for me to not question it is shame on me. But for you to forbid me to question it, shame on you, and you'll pay.
Yeah, you said that quite eloquently, so let that sink in for a second. For some people, then, in our own country, being an American or thinking American is a threat. And so I would say that election denial, or being called an election denier, or an election denier, is actually a critical thinker. And you, the individual, you have the right to use logic and reason and common sense to formulate your own belief, your own position, and those in power need to explain themselves at times. That's how I look at it, and so the name calling and all that, that's going to be going on from now until the cows come home. And that's just part of, human nature, but it's also part of the sleight of hand that we talked about. I'm going to call you an election denier. Well, at the same time, I'm denying things that are very similar. Stacey Abrams, just to pull one out of the hat, who used Hillary Clinton, all these people that denied all these elections in the past. For some reason, it's just amazing to me that they're calling people election deniers. Then the history shows and the record shows that they themselves did it, in fact.
Yeah, and another part of the American concept is, as a focus on the individual, it's up to the individual to decide whether the scientific method has been followed or not, and it's not up to the powers, the president of the United States, for example, to say that you're wrong. The president of the United States says I'm wrong. That's his opinion. I still have and am entitled to my opinion. I am entitled to demand transparency and demand that you reproduce results that you develop. And you have until you're transparent and can honestly show me how were the elections run, where do those wires go to that are in the machines, who's the company that sits there and counts all of these things and decides whether or not to relay the actual information or contrived information. I have a right to ask those questions. And what I saw in the 2020 election, I saw video evidence of ballot boxes being stuffed. And when they were questioned, the appropriate response, again following the logic and the scientific method, would been for the people that run the elections and are being challenged to demonstrate that there were no examples of widespread voting fraud. I'm sorry, I saw widespread voting fraud. And the term widespread is certainly a subjective term. And that's what the courts used, where they were faced with these challenges. That's what they used as their exculpatory out of the argument. If you can't reproduce your hypothesis, you can't reproduce the election results, then I'm sorry, you're lying to me. You're lying either in the sense that you're not telling me the whole truth, or you're outright lying to me. So I just want to know. I'd like to see a TV program just for my own edification, and to make me feel better and more comfortable about the electoral process. Show me how this works. Who are the guys behind the levers? Who's the guy behind the curtain? I don't know who they are. I don't know what their motives are. I know there's a lot of nefarious organizations, including worldwide organizations, that are focused on turning the United States into a communist state. I want to be sure those people aren't involved in any way. So government, show me. If you say there were 26,000 votes for so-and-so, I want somebody to sit there and count those ballots, because everywhere there's a vote, there should be a physical ballot. And if I don't know what happens to the ballots. What happens to them?
Great questions, great points. So, I would say this is that, we should all be like Missourians. We should demand valid results, with the show me state, of course. And, show me, if you don't feel comfortable with the results of an election in a free society, you have every right. They can call you whatever they want to call you, but you have every right as a citizen with God-given rights to question the veracity of it. So great conversation, Dan. So I guess I probably got, like you, probably more than 3 labels, but I, for one, am a guy that strongly supports the use of critical thinking skills, the exercising of the scientific method to come up with, through logical and reasonable methodologies, to come up with, something that satisfies your curiosity. So thanks for the conversation. The results aren't in. It'll be interesting to see where America goes from here. But these are interesting times, and these are times where your mind matters. So use it.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Mind Matters. Use your critical thinking. Use logic and reason. Make your own determinations on the critical issues. Stay alert. Stay alive. This show is brought to you by Levities.co, the provocative apparel company. Raw, edgy, and humorless. You don't have to agree with them. You have that right.